look at what you're doing. Is it working or not? And be open to suggestions and be open to change. My dad used to tell me, you know, you're not great until someone else says you are.
Dave, it's great to have you here. Megadeth, when you're on stage, the intensity of playing bass, driving that band is intensely exciting. But you also got involved with songwriting, record producing as a clinician, and as an author. So you really kind of widened your span of what your abilities and talents are.
Yeah, you know, when you get kind of famous, you get called to do all kinds of stuff, you know, and that's really where it starts. You know, I always go back to, you know, if you're on the stage, they just assume you can already play. So you're kind of beyond that. You know, you're beyond, dude, my licks are better than yours and all that stuff. It's more about communicating, and I realize that really I'm just a communicator, whether I do it with a bass, whether I do it like this, talking here, whether I do it in a clinic, authoring a book, my record label, even my coffee company. These are all basically just portals to allow other artists to have a voice. And I think in this day and age, as the record business has changed so much in an industry that probably you and I grew up in many years ago, obviously transitions, you have choices. You can either sit on the sidelines and cry foul, you know, or you just get on with it and you go along with it and you realize how to reinvent. And you know, that's really, you know, you really want to be creative in business, learn how to reinvent.
Well, this is the word, as opposed to retire, learn how to reinvent. That's a great, great line.
Yeah.
Where did it start for you? Where did music enter your life?
I grew up actually not far from where we're doing this interview, over in Jackson, Minnesota, on a farm. And from a very young age, my mom was a music fan. She grew up in Iowa. She actually got to see Elvis. Got Elvis's scarf from a show at the Vets Auditorium in Des Moines, Iowa, when she was a young girl. But then I remember we had Motown records, I remember a little Beatles 45, and when I was really young, my parents bought a Wurlitzer organ, which was this cutting edge technology of having a cassette player in it. And the first cassette that we had was Jesus Christ Superstar. And you know, now of course, I just bought that on vinyl recently, the old original vinyl, and I pulled the book out. I remember reading along with the lyrics, and of course now knowing Ian Gillan of Deep Purple, who I didn't know of at age 8 on the Wurlitzer organ. But you know, so that was really where it started. We had a musical household with my mother. She sang in the church choir. First I took some lessons on the organ from a local church organist. But she taught me how to read and play treble clef, bass clef, and then of course the pedal, which is, you know, almost like a drummer. You
Absolutely,
know, almost
four-way independence.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right. Exactly.
Good for you.
So I learned how to read music, and then, you know, in the 5th grade, I took up tenor saxophone. I was kind of like, all right, well, I'm probably not going to be a jock. I'm reasonably good at sports. I'm reasonably good at academics if I apply myself. But somehow and I didn't really want to even play orchestra music. I didn't like the music, quite honestly. Yeah. But the saxophone looked the coolest one, so I grabbed that and I started playing. And I got, just okay at it because I really wasn't that into the music I was playing with it. And again, treble clef, B flat tenor saxophone. And then at age, I don't know, about 9, 10 years old, I ride the school bus route. My brother and I got picked up early in the route, about 7:15 a.m. to be at school by 8:30. That gave us an hour to listen to rock and roll radio on the school bus. Nice. Ironically, the pastor's son, Dwight, had long hair, kind of like this, and he was cool, and he listened to WLS-AM out of Chicago. And that was where I started hearing things like Bachman Turner Overdrive, Kiss, Styx, Foreigner, of course Chicago, 10cc, all these kind of things. Yeah. And that caught my ear.
So the pop world entered your life.
That was it. And then once I discovered Kiss, Kiss were my Beatles. They were this magical, mysterious, you couldn't get to them. They were larger than life. Other musicians, obviously hearing things on the radio was also larger than life. Yeah. But Kiss was something of just a whole other level, and that's what I loved. I loved the showbiz of it. I loved the wow factor of it all, and that was the first record I bought was the Kiss Destroyer record, and got into it from there.
And that led you to bass.
Yep.
And from bass, you start meeting other musicians and you start jamming, getting together. What happened at that point?
Yeah, so again, being in a small little town, I picked up, on the back of the Kiss records, it says, Kiss use Gibson guitars and Pearl drums because they want the best, right? Which I now know is an endorsement, But at the time, I'm like, well, if they use Gibson, then I better use Gibson. So in the local newspaper, I found a Gibson EBO bass. My mother kindly went and bought it for $150. Don't know exactly what happened to that bass. It's disappeared somewhere in my life. But that and a little Fender Bassman, little amplifier. And I plugged it in and I was like, this doesn't sound like Kiss, but all right, I'll get started. So I bought my Mel Bay electric bass volume 1, sat at home, and because I'd had the Wurlitz organ experience, I knew how to read bass clef, and so I basically became largely self-taught through reading music books.
Nice.
Then I started to just look for anybody I could play with. I mean, the church guitar player came out to the house one day. I'm like, dude, let's jam. Like anything, I'll play anything. I'm just starving for music. And one day, walking down the hall of the school, it was either 5th or 6th grade, I saw my buddy Greg, who had just moved into town, and he was a little bit of a hellraiser and a troublemaker. And I think he had a Kiss T-shirt on, and I mean, that was the pipeline right there. And so we connected, and next thing you know, he started learning to play guitar, and we formed a band. And I remember I'd go to his house and we'd watch the Midnight Special and the late night, TV shows, and I mean everything from, I remember watching Ronnie Montrose, all the greats that were on those late night TV shows, and just we became music buddies, and that honestly is still what I do today, hang out with music buddies.
So in the process of now, you're focused on being a professional at this point now. So is that with that kind of?
I was focused on being a professional from the day I got the bass at age 11. And literally a few months later, I met my brother. I had an older brother, 2 years older than me in school. And so I hooked up with a couple of his buddies who was a guitar player and a drummer. We formed our first little 3-piece band, and again, play on the porch for mom and dad, whatever, anywhere we can play. And eventually, I remember there was a gig at the local armory, and they actually paid us money. So now we're actually technically in showbiz.
That's the point where you're getting paid.
And then getting paid to play.
Huge.
And it's awesome. And I just remember, now you got to have a set list. You got to have some stage clothes. You got to look. How hey, don't go on stage before the curtain goes. Like you kind of learn professional acumen right from the very beginning. Yeah. And of course, there's other bands around you, and most have more experience. So I was always the young guy in every band I was in. Even Megadeth, when we started Megadeth many years later, I was always the youngest guy for many years. And so I was always the youngest guy in those stages, and I would watch and I would learn and I would pay attention, and I would see even things like, hey, they have a road crew, like they got a guitar tech, and there seems to be a guy managing this thing, and they got a semi truck, and we have a van. Like, how do we get to the, and on it goes. And I mean, it's still the same thing even today in Megadeth. We'll show up with 4 trucks, someone else has 8. It's like, all right, well, how do we get to 8? And it's just kind of how this business has been for me ever since I got that bass guitar at age 11.
Fantastic. When did Megadeth start?
So fast forward, I get my high school education. Interesting moment, at about age 16, most of the stuff I got from the Midwest was from the big rock and roll magazines, Circus Magazine, Hit Parader, Rock Scene, and those were mostly things of New York, Los Angeles. And I started to notice Van Halen came out in the late 70s, and that really put the West Coast on the map with hard rock and what would become heavy metal music. And at age 16, I had this gut instinct. One day I was in the shed on the farm jamming with my band, and this instinct hit me, I got to get to LA. And it was like that God-sent moment, the Lord spoketh, And I went into the house, I told my parents, I'm dyeing my hair, I'm changing my name, I'm heading to LA like tomorrow, and they went, no, you're not. You're finishing school. So the next 2 years of my life, I focused everything on moving to Los Angeles. And there was a school out there, music school called Musicians Institute, which is still there. But they had a really cool curriculum, the Bass Institute of Technology, Percussion Institute, Guitar Institute. And a lot of the cool people that were making records, the Toto guys, a lot of the different guys in the LA scene would drop in and do clinics and things. And so I focused, okay, let me get to LA. I can maybe I can go to the school. My goal was maybe I can start or join a heavy metal band. So I focused on that. My parents supported it. I had a credit card. I had a $500 limit. I cleaned out my savings account of $700, and my dad gave me the keys to the family van. And I put all my gear in a trailer, and me and a couple buddies, we headed out there. I moved into an apartment on Sycamore, which is kind of like Hollywood and La Brea. It's the intersection there. And the music school, MI, was just down the street. And I move in, and within a couple of days, I discover a neighbor who lived upstairs named Dave Mustaine, who I'd not heard of. And he was in a band that I had not heard of yet called Metallica. And they had recently just parted ways. Then that essentially, June of 1983, is when Megadeth was formed. And
Fantastic.
Me and Dave and my buddy Greg, and we would rehearse, and one day we sat in the apartment and talked about band names. And you know, Megadeth is one of these bands that everything was the band was almost conceived before we were a band. I mean, we talked about the look, what we're gonna wear, the look of the stage, the concept of the lyric. I mean, everything. We really meticulously thought out, and still do to this day. It's a very strategic band. It's not a bunch of dudes just, hey, let's jam and see what we come up with. It's not that at all. And so it's a very different way to do it, yet I realized that's how Kiss became Kiss. That all my bands that I grew up liking, there's a reason they got to the top of the hill, because it was a strategic force. It was like battle.
Absolutely, but you know, it's funny because I know Peter Criss, and that same mentality of what they used for Kiss is what you guys did.
Yeah.
But even the naming of the band, how'd you come up with Megadeth?
You know, Megadeth was a song title that Dave had on the way home from New York when he got let go from Metallica. They sent him home on a Greyhound bus. Obviously deflated, you know, of course I hadn't met him yet. This was in April of '83, I met him in June, literally 2 months later. And the first song that he wrote was a song called Megadeth, based on, at the time, Senator Alan Cranston in California was talking about nuclear disarmament, talking about the arsenal of Megadeth can't be rid, meaning the nuclear power we have on this planet, we can't even get rid of it.
Yeah.
And so that was the basis of that first song. And then as we started talking about band names, my buddy Greg, the same one from 6th grade in Jackson, Minnesota, who was out there in California with me, he goes, I think we should call the band Megadeth. And there was kind of this moment in the room, like, whoa, that's heavy, you know. Black Sabbath was probably the heaviest band name that you could come up with at the time, and Megadeth was just like, whoa, that's heavy.
But it fits into that Black Sabbath, that Led Zeppelin, that Megadeth. You really kind of captured, and this is important for this next generation to realize that when you're putting the consciousness of a business together, you want to find what's going to be magic to sell the product that you're putting together.
Yeah, and also the imaging. You know, I've been in groups where, you know, you've got great music, great charisma even, and that's not enough. You know, there has to be a logo, there has to be an image, a t-shirt. I mean, people want to buy lifestyle.
Right.
And I think Megadeth, of course, you know, the nuclear disarmament. I mean, we've had, you know, greatest hits packages called the Arsenal of Megadeth.
Yeah.
Everything about the name really translates into the imaging on the album artwork, into the t-shirts. We created a mascot based on a couple of lyrics, looking down the cross and the skull beneath the skin, which were on our very first record, Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. And that created this mascot that we called Vic Rattlehead. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. So I mean, this whole, again, and this was all part of this just strategic, you know, idea that was coming forth. And Dave, you know, is an incredible writer. I mean, very intuitive with just really in the moment with things. And I've learned a lot working with Dave. You know, as he and I, you know, came from the beginning and grew up. You know, me being in the room as this thing was conceptualized. We've been through a lot of other members with our drummer and guitar and second guitar player. You know, but being in the room, it's like I really got the vision of what it was, and just like, I'm in, let's do this, this is great. And to really be supportive in Dave, you know, for Dave, for when he creates things, and for him, I think, to know that, hey, you know, I got his back, and then to, you know, over the years, we've, you know, co-composed and things that we do together. It's good to have a partner. So even if you're a solo artist, there's partnership. And I think that's the other part of this too, is that, you know, we all get to have our little piece of real estate on that stage, and we all get to have our you know, our piece. We all get a moment in the spotlight. But you know, if you can work together as a team, and everybody to kind of stay in their lane, as I say, you know, kind of stay in your lane, know your place, stay in your lane. There's a reason you're in that lane, you know, and we need someone in that lane, and we'd like you to be there. And if you're not going to, we'll get someone else to do it, you know. So really kind of just really own and appreciate what your lane is.
Absolutely, but this is what I so love about the band. It really, you balanced the artistic element of what you have with the business element.
Right.
You really took an entrepreneurial focus on how we're going to make this successful, and you stayed true to your path, and you made it successful.
Well, you know, Dave grew up in a very different environment than me. He's Southern California, you know, in a different. He learned how to kind of fight and scrap and hustle, and you know, he had a real city street hustle about him that has bode well for Megadeth. You know, that to really learn how to sell and how to. Well, in fact, one of the first jobs we had together was Dave was doing a phone sales job, and I needed a job to make some money. So he walked me and my buddies into this phone sales job, and I hated it. I was like, I just want to be a musician and play. And I remember the guy who ran this boiler room. He said to me, he goes, you know, David, you're a nice kid, you know, and everything from Minnesota, and you know, I know your music's your thing, and you're not going to be in a telephone room the rest of your life. But you know, this is good for you. You need to learn how to come out of your shell. You need to learn how to sell yourself. As a musician, you're going to be selling yourself from here on out for the rest of your life and the rest of your career. This is good for you. Really pay attention. So I hated hearing that, you know, and like lots of times the things we hate to hear the most are the things we need to hear the most.
Is the most important stuff.
And so that little phone sales job, we did a couple of them actually, but those little boiler rooms, you know, they were selling solar energy appointments, I think, you know, which why wouldn't you in Southern California? But, you know, that really taught me, I've learned more about music by doing non-musical things. And I think is maybe the bigger arc of my life is, you know, first of all, say yes. That was another lesson I learned. There was a period when Megadeth had disbanded in the early 2002, and people were calling me to do gigs and to play. And because I'd only been in one band for 18 years, you know, doing Megadeth, and we were united, and you know, there wasn't time to do solo projects, and I didn't really want to do solo projects. I enjoyed being in a band. This is my gang. This is who I roll with, you know. And one day that ended, and I just sat there and went, who am I now? Where's my identity? Am I only this guy from Megadeth? Like, I grew up learning to play jazz and a bunch of other music. Like, do I expand that now? That was a really big moment from 2002 until I came back to, you know, playing with Dave again in Megadeth in 2010. That season of those 8 years of my life were really some grow up, wake up, become an adult on my own 2 feet years. And I was scared to step out and play with other people. You know, again, kind of my identity as a thrash metal bass player, which I've got pretty good at, and sort of, you know, really kind of defined a bass style within a genre. People call me to do that, but then as I started getting called to play on Christian records and rock records and singer-songwriter records, I realized, wow, I'm pretty good at doing a bunch of other things too. And that was because, again, I took the organ lessons and the tenor sax lessons. So all of a sudden I kind of tipped back to, what was it like being in jazz band? I remember when the director would say, hey, use dynamics, don't play loud all the time. This isn't Led Zeppelin. And, you know, and really paying, you know, kind of coming back to a kind of a much deeper quiver of arrows that I'd been carrying with me all the time, you know, to learn how to be a little more musically sensitive in a lot of different settings.
So in that time, you start to widen your span of what your potential is and what your talents are.
Right.
Songwriting, getting involved with being a clinician, educational events, being an author. Did that kind of happen at that time?
It did. I mean, the first book that I wrote, Making Music Your Business, I wrote it actually on a Megadeth tour. It was for an album that we had called Euthanasia. It was in 1994. We'd had a big double multi-platinum success with a previous record, Countdown to Extinction. But the tides were turning. You know, Seattle music had come in. MTV said, yeah, we're done with heavy metal. We want to support Pearl Jam and Nirvana and, you know, Seattle music. And we're one of the few bands who survived that transition. Even as Megadeth, we had to reinvent ourselves at American radio. And, you know, we really had to, as a team, kind of put our egos aside and well, this is the way we've always done it kind of mentality. We had to put that aside so that we could survive and even thrive through those changes.
But it seemed like the business side was telling you to reinvent.
It was, absolutely. And what hit me was, I've kind of had some sort of young adult kind of spirit awakenings too. You know, I'd cleaned my act up and stopped drinking and taking drugs. I'd gotten married. And so all of a sudden there were, you know, I was turning into my early 30s, and some friends that I hang with, they said, yeah, good, you should be changing. You should, you know, as there's a, you know, a proverb that says, as the boy becomes a man, the man must let go of the boyish ways, you know? So it seemed like I was on a natural, you know, progression as a young adult. So I wrote this book, Making Music Your Business, and the reason I wrote it really was to parlay my experiences that I'd had as a successful musician down to younger musicians, largely a lot of our fan base. You know, we have a fan base who grow up like I did with Kiss, that want to do what we do, and they love our music, they want to play our music, our genre drives a lot of sales of guitar and instruments and drums in the music stores.
Big time.
Which is funny because as a kid growing up, I looked at the fusion musicians, and they were kind of the guys getting all the clinics and getting all the Zildjian and drum, advertisements in the magazines, and now my genre, we were the guys getting that moment, you know, and so I realized that, to hand down to them, I was thinking, if Gene Simmons or Geddy Lee or Angus Young or any of my heroes had ever written a book going, hey, psst, kid, come over here. This is kind of how the music business works.
Powerful.
I would have bought that book in a heartbeat.
Powerful, yeah.
I would go to see them, at a clinic or a seminar to hear them talk about that. So that's what that book was. And that opened up a huge avenue because colleges around the country, around the world, they didn't have music business programs. They didn't anything like that. It was really, and now almost all of them do. I mean, especially if you go to any kind of a music curriculum, there's at least some kind of music business 101.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I know my book has been used in some colleges and stuff just because they're like, well, the guy's Megadeth, he must know what he's talking about.
Absolutely, and even what we're doing today at the Sessions panel, we're here at Western Illinois University, and with this panel we're going to have many students going to be there. The advent of your experience and what you put in the book, that's what we're going to use to inspire and give these kids direction.
Right.
And which is what this is all about.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, as musicians, we tend to get caught up in our acts, whether it's our fingerboard or our drum kit or our keyboard. We get really kind of into our world, right? And, the bigger scope of the business of music, and most of it we figure out as we go. I mean, as much as I could write a book, as much as you can go to a college and take a course, there's some general parameters. But the reality of it is, like, how do I get my music in the door of somebody to become my cheerleader and run this up the flagpole and get someone to salute it? I mean, that's, like American Idol. I mean, this whole world we live in is like these game shows.
Absolutely.
Seem to be people go to, these game shows to try to get some kind of someone pay attention to me. And even if you lose, in fact, some of the people that have lost have become some of the biggest successes.
Absolutely.
But at least they're on the radar, and all of a sudden a record label guy, is paying attention to you. Some manager maybe says, hey, the kid can sing, let's pay attention to him. So if nothing else, even, the game show concept of trying to get into the music business is an avenue, as much as, a band who's out playing at the local pub, on every weekend, trying to get the attention of somebody to help walk them in the door and at least say, hey, Mr. Record Label President or radio programmer or manager, meet tomorrow's generation of music.
Absolutely, and there are more options now because of the internet, because of social media. There's many, many more options. A lot of the young students and the young artists that are inspired are watching this. In closing, what would you say to the next generation where they are listening, they follow you, they hear your word? What would you say to them to give them the fuel and maybe some of the direction that they need to achieve their dream?
I'd say, first of all, do what really makes you happy. Because even in our biggest years as professionals where we're making money, we're enjoying the successes, it's still a lot of hard work. And if you're doing something you don't enjoy, they call it making the donuts for a reason. You know what I mean? To get up to make the donuts. And if you're not enjoying it, man, it can be a really interesting golden handcuffs, being a slave to, the paycheck, the fame. Fame is a drug too.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of things pay attention to those things. Especially kind of check your motives. And can continually check your motive. Why am I doing this? Is this really bringing me joy? I love the game. The game of kind of figuring it out and continuing to invent and reinvent. And then I think probably finally, look at what you're doing. Is it working or not? Somebody may come along, and say, maybe try this a little bit differently, And be open to suggestions and be open to change. My dad used to tell me, you're not great until someone else says you are. And I remembered that my whole career. And I've read all those Kiss books, and I remember they're futzing around with the makeup, and finally their manager, Bill Aucoin, came in, as I understand, and he's the one who kind of really helped them develop the characters.
Absolutely.
So again, a fundamental idea, but sometimes it takes an outsider, a producer, a manager, someone from a label, somebody else to come in from the outside and say, you know what, why don't you tweak this a little bit over here?
Yeah.
And then if you start having some success, I mean, you'll tell, because it's like the rooms start filling up, suddenly your songs are on the radio, and it's like, you know, be willing to try to do some things somebody else's way too.
Absolutely. Well, you continue to be this positive energy in the music industry, which is so powerful. And here you are out there with Megadeth, pushing it hard, and you've created a mega life. You really, really have. Dave, on behalf of the sessions, we thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You've done great.
Thank you. Thank you.